Every college football YouTuber has been doing this, and I might as well also do this. I got to give you my reaction today to the college football playoff rankings and debate it, right? Like, who should be in, who will be in? Do I think the ratings are accurate? This entire situation is cursed, and truly, in many ways, this whole season is cursed. And this just sucks, but we got to talk about it and break it all down for you in today's video. But before we do that, we have just started this brand new college football channel, and we are on the path to 1,000 subscribers. So help us do that by leaving a like and subscribing, and also comment down below, who do you want to be in the Final Four? Let's do that for this video. Who, in your ideal world, you can make the matches, you can make it all kind of come together the way you want. You're the college football wizard. Who would you like to see make it into this year's 14 playoff? All right. So, you know, when I look at these and I think about the possible scenarios, I don't know where to start. Okay? Like this is, so I suppose I'll start here, which is that I am probably one of the few people in this entire sport that am not a fan of the 12-team playoff, or not a fan really of playoff expansion at all. Okay, I think me and Josh Pate are like the only two people who are against expanding the playoff, and I'm not even here to get into the reasons for that. But I will say, if there was any year where you could make a very solid case to expand the playoff, a playoff which, by the way, I still think does not need to be 12. If anything, it should be like 6 or 8. But regardless, any expanded playoff this year would have made this entire headache a lot easier. And so maybe it is poetic in a sense that if people like me are on the fence about expanding the playoff, hey, the last year before we do, let's create a situation that's totally cursed to sell the new system to everyone. I don't know. But with that said, okay, let's just get into this. Okay. So I think this becomes pretty clear. You got Georgia at 1, Michigan at 2, Washington 3, Florida State 4. Those are the top 4 currently. I think the argument a lot of people are making, okay, and by the way, I tend to usually agree with this, is that the top 4 are, yes, undefeated, and that deserves credit. And I will say, even as it pertains to Florida State, I think if the top 4 all remain undefeated, it's hard to make a case that they shouldn't all be in the playoff, right? These are all Power 5 teams. I understand even, say, Florida State and Washington have not seemed like the best teams on the field this year. You still play the games, right? You still got to play the games. They won the games. They deserve the credit, even if you got a backup quarterback in one Seminole team. Regardless, though, I think the reason people are not happy about this is you just kind of have a feeling, right? I think if Georgia wins Saturday, people will not dispute that. Michigan already, I don't think people are disputing it, but you just kind of have a feeling that Washington and Florida State are not truly pound for pound among the 4 best teams in America. Okay? Many people are making the case for Alabama, which, by the way, to tell you the honest truth, I think right now, objectively, forget resume, forget who actually deserves it, I think Alabama currently, in terms of the ball they're playing, is one of the 4 best teams in this country, right? But right now, they're sitting at number 8. Texas as well. I think Texas is better than Florida State. I think Texas is better than Washington. But as you see now, they're sitting at 7. Ohio State at 6. Let's be real. I don't think I think Ohio State's just going to sit there, right? I think what the committee's waiting to do is, if, say, a Texas wins or an Alabama wins, they're going to use that as the pretext to jump over, Ohio State. Oregon sitting there at 5, at the very least, Oregon will have the chance to settle it on the field with Washington, because I too think, and I said that in the prediction, I think Oregon is probably a better team overall than Washington, right? I understand, lost the game in the middle of the season, but pound for pound, the better team. But regardless, we're at least lucky in terms of Oregon that they'll have the chance to work that out. Okay, so that's fine. But even if Oregon does work that out, okay, let's say that Oregon beats Washington, and let's say Florida State, which I think is going to happen. I predicted that if you saw the prediction video. Let's say Florida State takes care of business against Louisville, and you have this up for grabs 4 seed. Well, then who takes the number 4? And truly, like, I don't know. Like, this is such a bad situation, right? Because let's say hypothetically, right? Let's say Alabama beats Georgia. And follow along with me here, class, okay? Alabama beats Georgia. Texas takes care of business. Oregon takes care of business. Well, first of all, I guess another question is, does Georgia fall out of the top 4? I don't, this hurts my brain because it's it's not an easy decision. There is not a clear answer to this question at all whatsoever, right? Because obviously the criteria for the playoff committee, they say they're taking the 4 best teams. And truly, if you're going to take the 4 best teams, then, take the 4 best teams. But we also know that's not really what it's about. Because last year, right, TCU was not one of the 4 best teams, but they took them off of the basis of deserving, right? So, I get it. It's a mix of those two. And that's the way the playoff works, and that's fine. But even with that said, overall, I'll say this. Overall, I think if Georgia loses a close game to Alabama, they should still be in the playoff. And I think the committee will be thinking about that and will be considering it, right? Georgia not only is objectively one of the 4 best teams, but when you just kind of look at the body of work this year, they have quite a few top 25 wins. In my opinion, again, if Georgia loses close, they are one of the 4 best teams. But I don't know. Okay, forget that for a second. All right, forget, because that's hurting my brain too much. Let's have this other debate, which is, if let's just say there's an up for grabs 4 seed, who deserves it the most? Oregon, Texas, or Alabama? Let's take the video in that direction. And sorry for whatever just happened here, right? So let's say all 3 of those teams obviously win their conference championships. If you're number 8 Alabama, you just beat the number 1 team in the country, which is Georgia. I think that deserves a lot of credit. If you're number 7 Texas, you beat number 20 Oklahoma State at 9-3. It's a decent win, but if you got to make a strong case, it's probably not the ideal, most statement win, right? And then if you are Oregon, you will have beaten number 3 Washington in a rematch, which I think in some ways makes you like effectively undefeated, right? You avenge your 1 loss. So that's a very good point on the resume. But as compared to Alabama, it's not quite beating number 1. So here's what I'll say about this. I think in terms of who is above who, I think if it comes down to Alabama and Texas, Texas will get in over Alabama and should and deserves to get in over Alabama, right? Because don't get me wrong. Do I think if Texas and Alabama played again today, let me say this, I do think Alabama would win that game. I think Alabama has hit their stride, found their groove. They're a much different team than they were in week 2. But still, regardless, the regular season still has to mean something. You can't just throw that out and make it entirely about, Las Vegas betting odds and who would be favored to win, right? Obviously, Texas won in week 2. It would totally destroy the entire value of the regular season for generations to come for Texas to be jumped by an Alabama team who they beat. And I don't think that's going to happen. I don't think it should happen. And that's fair enough. Okay. I think the more interesting debate is if it comes down to, say, Texas versus Oregon. Who wins that debate? Who wins that debate? And truthfully, I don't know, but I honestly think I might give the edge resume there wise maybe to Oregon, right? Maybe to Oregon. And that's an open debate, honestly. Like, I'd be very upset either way if I was a fan of those teams, because I would feel screwed, because it's a hard comparison to make. But the reason I might slightly lean Oregon in that resume is because, look, in conference championship week, the last week of the season, they will have just beat the number 3 team. And regardless if it's a close game or a blowout, that's going to be a statement. Now, if you're Texas, and I said this in my prediction in terms of the Big 12 championship, what you want if you're Texas is not just to beat Oklahoma State, you need to blow out Oklahoma State. And so if it's 59-0, like you saw with Ohio State in 2014, then that conversation becomes a lot closer. But I think Oregon beating number 3 Washington may give them the slight edge there in that. By the way, selfishly, and I said this in the other video, right, on that, I want to see Texas in the playoff, but I'm being kind of objective here, okay? I would rather see Texas than Oregon, but objectively, I think Oregon winning that Pac-12 championship, and then also, if you want to talk about resume, I think Big 12, Pac-12 this year are pretty much comparable. Now, Texas does have that out-of-conference win against Alabama in week 2, which also does count for something, which makes this difficult. But I would also point to the fact that in terms of beating top 25 teams and you know, teams that are good and just sitting out of the top 25 by dominant margins, Oregon has been a lot more dominant in their wins this year than Texas has, right? Texas, a lot of different games this year, had to kind of eke out a close win. Oregon, a lot of different games this year, outside of really the Washington game and maybe Texas Tech early on in the season and stuff like that, right? Later in the season, they really won pretty convincingly against the majority of their competition. And if you want to talk about eye test, I don't know. I guess maybe that should count for something. I don't know. So point being, I don't even know if I necessarily agree with it deep down. But I'm just saying, in terms of trying to find an objective metric to make it work, I think it goes in. I think you probably say, right, Oregon has a slight edge over Texas if it comes down to those two teams. If it comes down to Alabama and Oregon, then that's another tricky question, right? But if you're Alabama, you will have just beat the #1 team in the country, which maybe you shouldn't use recency bias, but I also think recency bias is appropriate here because we're talking about what are the teams now, right? They're going to be going into the postseason in their current strides. Unlike Texas, unfortunately, being stuck with Oklahoma State in the championship game, if Alabama wins Saturday, they will just be the #1 team. That is a better point on the resume than #3 Washington, and few people would dispute that. Now, on the flip side, you once again say, you could make the same argument, which is that, hey, look, Bama had to eke out some of their wins, and you said the same thing about Texas, and that is certainly true. I think the difference, though, might be, in a sense, strength of schedule, right? Strength of schedule. Texas has had a pretty strong schedule, don't get me wrong. But the Big 12 is not the SEC by any means, right? And if you're Alabama, you will have had wins against LSU, convincing win, by the way, 2 possessions, right? Decent win against LSU, you know, Georgia, obviously, Ole Miss, right? I think resume points like that kind of just tilt it a little bit towards Alabama. And don't get me wrong, maybe program history bias also kind of gives you a little bit of edge there. Hey, it's Nick Saban. People know that. So I think that's how it goes. I think if it's between Alabama and Oregon, then Bama might have a slight resume edge. If it's between Oregon and Texas, again, I don't really know. That's really close for me. I might give it to Oregon just because of what I predict to happen in championship weekend. But like I said, if Texas wins like 59-0 over Oklahoma State, maybe you give the edge there to Texas. And if it comes down to like a 3-way tie between all those teams, I don't know what happens in that situation, but I definitely think Alabama's going to get screwed, right? Because that's what sucks if you're Alabama is that Texas always has that one win over you, that they beat you in the regular season, right? So there's no scenario, I think, where you jump Texas. So I don't know if this video was very coherent. This is all to say, let's just hope in conference championship weekend, at the very least, Washington loses, Florida State gets upset, and then let's just hope some other upsets happen. I don't know, right? Because the best scenario here in terms of just the sport and having to avoid any controversy of a team truly getting screwed, which is very likely to happen I think in this situation, is everything just falls in the right place. Maybe Texas loses or something like that, and you get a batch of 4 teams that you're happy with, which usually happens every single season. I I understand there's always been a little bit of controversy. Last year, I didn't really think TCU should have been in, but it was like, okay, I get it. 2014, you can make a case maybe for Baylor or for TCU again, right? But generally speaking, the reason why the 4-team playoff, I thought, has always been a fine format and never actually had a whole lot of issue is that usually the season works itself out, right? Teams expose themselves. Someone gets upset along the way, which that's the other thing. You just did not see a lot of different upsets this year, right? And it just all works itself out. But that's the problem with this season. Not enough upsets. And then in some ways, like the wrong kind of upsets. So we're just in a trap situation, you know, and it's funny, at the beginning of the year, everyone was comparing this to 2007, but 2007 was an upset rated season. I'd say if anything, this is more like 2008, where you have at least 4, arguably 5 teams that all seem like they deserve a shot at the national title. And then at the time, the BCS format gave it to Oklahoma and Florida, obviously. But, you know, if you ask me that season, I think USC could have given Florida a run. I think Texas, right, was definitely up there with Colt McCoy. You know, and you talk about that USC defense, Ray Maluga, Clay Matthews. And obviously, in a playoff year, you'd also have to think about Alabama, right? Getting another shot there. It reminds me a lot of that season, truly. But with that said, folks, let me know what you think in the play of this cursed situation in the comment section down below. And until next time, Alpha Moves only. God bless and peace.